Okay.
So what I start to convey in the manuscript is a few what I think is not unique ideas, but I haven't seen it articulated yet. Maybe because of my limited repertoire of knowing what's out there, or maybe just because I'm coming at it from a different perspective. But in medical practice, they're very clinical encounters. They're in busy medical life. Particularly for subspecialists who aren't psychiatrists. They're clinical encounters with very specific purposes a lot of times to handle or diagnose and treat very specific problems. But in that, particularly depending on your subspecialty, like neurology is mine, there is really vulnerable conversations and an intimate awareness that evolves in those encounters about a lot of dimensions of a patient's life, some which are directly or indirectly related to the reason they're there, but often
Mhm.
ignored. And so it's, of course, something that any experienced clinician knows, but sort of what you do with the facts that sort of unfold in a patient encounter is highly variable. And the uncomfortable truth is that it's highly variable because of factors that have nothing to do with what's actually best for the patient. Um, and so in illustrating through this case, I tried to get to that point of not only how problems unfold that are well managed by logotherapeutic techniques as I'm learning them, but also what are the obstacles that get in the way of a physician taking on those next steps, assuming that they have the training to do so or the confidence and a skill to do so. And in the manuscript, I talk about the obstacles are, some of the obvious ones. Do I have the time? And that time factor relates to a lot of other extraneous issues. Who's in control of your time? If you work for a health system, appointments are made for you, and the amount of time you spend is dictated to you. And that physicians may feel victims of the system. It's not that they don't have a voice, it just would take a lot of energy to oppose the system or to individualize the way you bring yourself to the patient. And so there are these obstacles that are in the way, which sort of reminded me or just highlighted for me a concept that I don't know is articulated yet, and that is the conscience of the professional. In medical ministry, as Frankl talks about it, as I've read, The Doctor and the Soul multiple times now, and trying to get at whether this is articulated anywhere, that that a professional who's bringing themselves to practice, whether it's a therapist or counselor or a doctor, that there is not just, your instincts and clinical judgment and things like that that are very sterile analyses of the way you bring yourself to a patient. There's also a professional conscience that we often ignore and don't even teach our students how to identify it. And that professional conscience is the one that drives us to say, this person actually needs help in an area that I didn't expect. It's a little bit beyond the reason they're here, and maybe beyond the confines of neurological practice in my case. And I don't really have time for it. And but it needs to be done. And in fact, I know how it needs to be done. And in fact, I'm best equipped to know how it's being done because I know so many details about this patient that would be lost if I delegated to someone else.
Wow.
And so there's this idea that where does the professional conscience fit in? And when do we sort of try and have voice to it so that we don't become sort of subservient to the systems we work in or to the own personal imperatives we have to just get it done, see as many as patients as possible, either because you want to use your time in a certain way or you want to make a certain amount of money or you need to pay for your overhead. There's a lot of competing factors that get in the way of professionals listening to their conscience to help their patients the best they can. And so, in looking like a great system that's patient-centered in America, um, then it looks nice that you have a team. You have the doctor, you have the therapist, and that you delegate off a number of things that sometimes works well. But a lot of times, as a medical professional, I know it's not going to work well. I know that certain problems I can take care of well beyond my exact role, not really efficient with my time, that will create a certain kind of personal stress. But if I delegate it, I know it's not going to happen right for the patient. And that awareness is my professional conscience. And my professional conscience, which really should be a call to action. What am I going to do about this? One approach is to just say, I don't have the freedom to change it, which is against logotherapeutic concepts. Of course, I have the freedom to change it. Maybe it's I don't have the energy or desire. When is a problem big enough to actually find the energy and desire because it's the right thing to do? You're called to responsible professionalism. And so you'll see in the manuscript, I embed these kind of busy internal conversations to try and introduce the idea of uh, professional conscience and where it should sort of where it is in the mind of a professional. And so in this case, I bring voice to it by just doing it and giving it an example, which happens regularly. I know a lot of doctors do. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I just say there's a lot of reasons that it may not happen or that it may not happen well. So in this case, I present a pretty simple case of a psychiatrist. I have a psychiatry colleague who refers a fair number of patients to me for either complicated neurologic issues or for mental health issues. She happens to work virtually in another state, and it turned out that her stepfather suffered a brain injury. He fell off a ladder while intoxicated, and it led to a concussion. No major brain trauma, no operations required, not even hospitalized, just an emergency room visit, check him out, he does okay. But after that, he fails to thrive. He has what we call post-concussive symptoms.
Yes.
He has dizziness. He has cognitive clouding. He is traumatized by life with his some word finding and some subtle but very real cognitive impairments that in fact lead to him taking time off of work. His work, he's a very successful businessman. He's been a CEO of startup companies that have been highly successful, and he had recently taken a job 6 months beforehand. Not so pleasant, it turns out, the job, but he could not do his work. So he had to take time off and be on short-term disability. But the problem is the psychiatrist is contacting me urgently to have her stepfather flown from another state with her mother because he's failing to thrive. His behavior is remarkably impaired. He's disinhibited. He's saying terribly obnoxious things. He's mean to the psychiatrist's mother. And economically, he cannot make ends meet. And the doctors are not helping him locally. They're not giving answers to what's happening. They're not medicating him properly because his behavior is so erratic. And will I see him? The main focus of seeing him is he needs to be on long-term disability and he needs to be on medications. Now, she's very strong-minded. I'm used to her saying he needs to be on medications because she thinks everyone needs to be on medications. So I'm used to filtering and listening to that. And you'll see in the manuscript, if you have the time to read it, that in my busy mind, I go through all the theories of why is it so urgent? Why me? There's lots of neurologists nearby them. And, what is it that she's calling? Is she really calling because she thinks she can manipulate me? She knows what he needs. He needs to be on medicines. She knows that they're in an economic complicated circumstance. She wants someone who will fill out disability papers. This is what goes in my mind. Or is it just that the medical system is as imperfect as I know, and they're really having difficulty getting wise help? Therefore, I become the savior of the patient. Um, and so I don't know what the task is. And so then you'll see in the manuscript, I go through this idea of how often it is that as doctors, we don't know the context of why we're seeing a patient, what the real job is. It
Hmm.
becomes oversimplified in our health systems, a patient like this, where the doctor comes into the office and on the chief complaint that's provided by some scheduler and reiterated by some nurse that does a blood pressure and brings the patient to a room, concussion. And the neurologist walks in thinking, okay, I'm seeing a patient with concussion from 5 months ago. And in a 45-minute session, somehow they're going to bring it to conclusion. And so I sort of ponder and share with all of you, if you read the manuscript, how imperfect that system is, how much is lost by not having all the context of why the call even came in the first place 5 months afterwards for concussion. Does a doctor in 45 minutes have time to really figure all of this stuff out? Anyway, it turns out as this case unfolds that he had concussion, for sure, but that it was a relatively minor injury, and the kind of behavioral problems are extreme that are happening at home. He is a idiot. He is being mean to his wife. He is saying terrible things. He he's clearly acting in a disinhibited way, but well beyond what I would have expected from lots of experience for the kind of brain injury that he has. And he had no pre-existing issues like that. On the other hand, his wife is also like deranged in the way she's interacting with him. Like, and it's obvious that there's a kind of dynamic between the two of them that is really causing tremendous misery and therefore gave me window into this idea from the daughter who's calling me that she's desperate because her mom is miserable. She hates the guy she's with, her stepfather, because he's being so mean and unappreciative. Because it turns out the daughter is filling in the gap of taking care of everything, this psychiatrist daughter. So I get some background and I meet with the wife and the patient, the wife first, so I can hear from her perspective, what's going on at home. Then I meet with the patient, and it's clear that they both are very true in their distaste of each other because listening to each of their rants about each other, it's obvious that they're both acting like um, brain damaged people. And so, but neurologically, I'm unimpressed by his disability and very skeptical that concussion would have made these behavioral changes happen. So I make a plan. I sort of realize in front of me that there's a home dynamic that I need to understand better because the source of their misery seems to be related to what's happening in the home. And there's a dynamic with the psychiatrist expert daughter who's diagnosing an impairment in her stepfather that needs to be medicated that's a result of the brain injury. And so they're sort of stuck in this concept, this formulation that I think is wrong of a brain injured patient misbehaving at home, wreaking havoc to their life, not bringing economic support. And now her solution, the reason they're there for me, is to get disability and to get him medicated so he acts better. And I see the task as sort of different than that. So I do the routine things to buy myself a little bit of time, order scans of the brain. He's getting neuropsychological testing. By the way, you see in the manuscript, the neuropsychologic testing is being done by another colleague I know who she often refers to do with the comprehensive neuropsychologic testing to define his cognitive impairment and to prove that it's impaired enough that he really shouldn't be working so he can get his disability income. And I order electroencephalography, which will help validate certain things about organized brain function and some blood work. And then I arrange to see him in follow-up after that testing. All the tests come back normal except the neuropsychologic testing. And the neuropsychologic testing defines brain injury that's impairing the patient that would be attributable to the kind of patterns we see with traumatic brain injury. Is this too much information or is this okay so far?
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah,
Okay,
thank
okay.
you.
So the traumatic brain injury, I sort of like there's a professional conscience moment of saying, this doesn't make sense. It's easy, by the way. It's easy because it's okay, some lingering cognitive injury, you're moving sort of quickly, ignore the logo hints of the first encounter, and bring it to conclusion, moving quickly, right? Scans are okay, thank God. Electroencephalography, looking good. Prognosis is good. I'd expect you to recover a little bit faster, but I think you'll get better over time. Uh, Job well done, send them out. That's one option. The other option is to take that extra step and say, why is the neuropsychologic testing just not making sense for what I saw? Now, I wouldn't have known that had I not done my due diligence to talk to the patient's wife and all that. If I didn't know the home dynamic, I would think it all fits together nicely, and I'd send them home as impaired as they would be and likely to get divorced and be unhappily poor. Um, but there's sort of this professional kind of saying, it's not making sense, and I know too much information about what's happening that could be contributing to this. I think I'll call the neuropsychologist. And when I call the neuropsychologist, it's not some big shocker. It might be to some of you that don't know this happens, or it could be disappointing to know it happens, is the neuropsychologist tells me, he said, oh, I'm glad you called. Uh, that yes, I know how the report reads. I exaggerated a little bit because I wanted to help our psychiatrist colleague just get the paperwork done and get the long-term disability. And so I say, oh, I'm glad I called too. That's helpful to know. Of course, I didn't have any punitive interaction with him about it because, that's a separate conversation. I said, wow. I said, I could have made some wrong decisions if I hadn't called you. I'm glad I did. So now I have the realization that you okay? You don't need a Heimlich maneuver from across the oceans. Okay. So the so then what happens in this particular case is the I decide in that testing, after all the testing, that I have a meeting with the patient and I ask for this time for the patient to come alone. And so I can really spend some time with him. I block off extra time at the misery of everyone that works in my office, and I have this visit with the patient. And in that visit, I go through the test results, help him understand optimistically what it means. And then I tell him that what's happening at home, it's just not making sense as being directly related to the brain injury, even though the brain injury or the concussion set in motion things at home, that I don't see that brain damage is the reason things are happening poorly at home. So I say, can you go, first of all, does this idea, just knowing honestly, I'm going to be with you for your long-term disability. I'm going to help advocate for you. Don't worry. I said, the doors are closed. It's you and me. I just need honesty. And if I can honestly understand what's happening, I think I can help you. But if I'm working on a fiction, I cannot. So just help me understand the truth. And and it said and he said it resonated with him that this makes total sense for the first time. I said, okay, so for both of our sake, put together the narrative. I want you to think about it to help me understand what's happened in the last 5 months for your life to be so fucked up, excuse my French. And so he goes through and he tells me this beautiful narrative. In the manuscript, it comes off efficiently. It wasn't so efficient. It took some Socratic dialogue to sort of get him to share it, but for efficient conveyance to all of you, I put it in a smooth narrative. But he gives a whole narrative of what's happened. The concussion led to him being off work. Historically, his wife is sort of like a hypomanic kind of energy and attention deficit by his opinion. And so there's always a new project, one new thing after another. He's always the physical person who's doing all of her like projects that come one after another, never completed. It's a source of frustration over the years, never complained about it, because he always loved, he'd come home on the weekends and it would happen. And he always knew he could leave for work on Monday. And he could not wait to be at his work. And that's the way that he managed his life, like a lot of people. He puts up with things, doesn't bring voice to his discontentment. It's his second marriage. And it just sort of, it worked until he became grounded by not being able to work.
Mm.
And then what happened was he initially was unwell. He's at home, laying around a little bit more. When he lays around, he looks lazy. She doesn't like laziness. And then what's he do? He's watching TV and he's watching Fox News. And in the polarized kind of political world that we live in, that his wife, who's very liberal, um, sort of would watch him sort of watching Fox News all day and listen to things that she does not want to hear. And it created this kind of polarized home that was sort of propelled further by the politics. And it led to commentary about each other. She's a woke, like liberal, and just like making fun of family members who may be off the mainstream. And she would, found him to be a racist, which he is, by the way, by his way he spoke. But they both became extreme versions of themselves in this dynamic, and he tells that story. And that's just one part of it is the Fox News piece. It's just sort of one illustration. And so, and he was so unhappy with her constant assignments as he started to get physically a little bit better that he started to act out and become angry and frustrated because he never really brought voice to control in his home of what he wants and doesn't want. And so what happened is that the daughter who is watching this and the wife, by the way, who's a very experienced PhD psychotherapist, um, found him to be disinhibited and become a huge person, that this is a personality change. He always was a peaceful guy at home, always doing what was asked of him. And now he's like a ranting, raving lunatic. And this must be his brain injury. And that's sort of how it all happened.
Mm.
And
Wow.
that's what he shared. And it was plausible, it fit. And he owned it. And so pretty quickly.
Wait,
And
can I ask a question here? So did he think that it was his brain injury, or they thought, or both?
well, he when it wasn't posed to him that it doesn't have to be his brain injury, he wasn't overthinking it. He just realized he was always irritated and frustrated and angry, and just assumed that that was a personality change because that's the way it was.
Mm.
And his wife and his daughter-in-law, and his wife and his stepdaughter are experts in the area. So he sort of bought into it without
Mm.
really thinking too much about it till there was this pause created by this appointment to
Mm.
help you know that this doesn't make sense no matter what you're told. This is what I'm thinking. Can you create a narrative where it can make sense? And that's how and now as he's saying it, he's now understanding it with a kind of aha moment that was palpable if you're in the room. And so then you'll see in this, then there was a kind of meaning of the moment that's created, right? Like, okay, it's one thing to acknowledge that, but how do you fix it? Okay. And you'll see that that's a part of the manuscript where I say, okay, like one option is to like refer them, say, okay, you need some psychotherapy and marriage counseling, right? That's the delegation piece. I say, but like there's, part of that counseling and the psychotherapy requires someone with confidence to be saying, no matter what, like I know, for example, in this case, because of the daughter and the wife, stepdaughter and wife, I know that they're going to blame the brain injury to someone who doesn't know better. Okay. And no matter how much I tell a therapist and prepare them, no matter what they say, I could say to a colleague psychotherapist, no matter what they say, if they try and blame the brain injury on any of this, I want you to ignore that and tell them that's crap. And I told them it's crap. But I know that's not going to work so well, right? So that the best way to efficiently help them without long delays and waiting for appointments and then the discovery and then the back and forth is just for me to take care of it. I don't mean that everyone's equipped to take care of it. It just so happens I could from experience and from Botch's help and education. So this is an example of just taking care of it. So I say, okay, it's time for logotherapy. And so at that moment, I shift gears, and that's where I create you'll see like the script of back and forth. So to share with you how the logotherapy interaction went. And in that case, I didn't summarize. I I said, do you mind if I record it? And I recorded our conversation so I could transcribe it specifically later for this purpose. And and so in that logotherapy, we try and get at, why is he stuck and how's he going to unstick himself? And that's sort of just entertaining just to sort of read how that conversation goes. With me trying my best to try and, use my new learned sort of logotherapeutic ideas to help him get to a particular point. You'll see there's an ending point, which is a call, like a to-do list. And the ending, as the manuscript goes on, the to-do list for him, which really involves owning what we've learned today, that at that moment, and for him to really think about why he's being such a jerk. That is, and to talk about the fruitful tension created by his unhappiness and harnessing it to change the way things are at home. And then to also just you'll see a to-do list that's sort of a call to action for them. And then I just told him that I would do his disability for longer because obviously the indirect effect of the concussion has been this kind of strain that has made him continue to be impaired, but it's not going to be forever. That's the good news. And that it's just that we'll put a time frame on it once we understand how quickly we can get you feeling better. And then we decide with his, being part of it to have regular meetings. Initially, he proposed every month. Um, and I told him that that's unacceptable. It's great from my perspective. I don't have the time to do it more often. I said, but you right now have this fresh on your mind. This needs to be taken care of. Your life is in the, waiting. And so this needs to be happen. This is an acute problem from my perspective. Tell me if I'm wrong. He said, no, it is. I just didn't think you would have the time. I said, no, I want to meet weekly for 2 months. I want you to figure out a way to do that. They have a friend who has a corporate jet, so they travel back and forth all the time. And so I met with him weekly and every other week with his wife. And with the wife, it just so happened um, it was timely because I had already read some of Elizabeth Lucas's, family logotherapy stuff. And then Batya had introduced it again, when I was knee deep into this, which reminded me of how to be smarter about it. And so you'll see in the resolution of the case, I talk about these sessions where I go back and forth with the patient and his wife. And I introduced an idea. I don't know if it's unique, and you, Dita and Batya, you can tell me if it is. Um, but I use this technique with them as a couple, when they're in this sort of negative cycle that Lucas talks about, the sort of like uh, the double conflict. And 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 called it paradoxical self-projection.
Oh man.
Okay, and the idea is okay, using humor because they are funny people. I got to this point in their couples interaction, where I said that, like, I met you the first time, and I have to tell you, and I said to him, Robert is not his real name. I say, Robert, you are a racist and you're xenophobic and you come across as a jerk. I mean, I think that, Melissa, the fake name wife, is right. And I said, Melissa, you are very, you know, controlling and like overly liberal to a point of discomfort, with the kinds of things that you're saying. I say, so I actually think it would be a great exercise in agreement if you can both agree, contract now from this point and while we're working together, that from this point on, you will not sort of talk about each other's politics. But if you talk about politics at all, you take a caricature of your own, the extremes that you don't like in your own party, in your side of the aisle, and just openly make fun of the extremes of your politic instead
Mm.
of talking about each other's, and have fun with it because the extremes of both sides are pretty extreme and uncomfortable for everybody.
Oh,
And,
brilliant idea. Brilliant idea.
and so and so they did this kind of paradoxical self-projection in front of me. We practiced it. We had a lot of fun with it. And 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 in the laughing about it, how much time in, as opposed to how oppositional they were in their views and
Mm-hmm.
before. But now they actually have fun with it, and if they ever feel the need to talk about it, they say, "I cannot believe," and then they only bring up their own extremes. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's sort of been an important kind of thing that I stumbled on with them. And they're doing well. And so in the end, I sort of addressed this idea of just how the case sort of brings this idea of a fluidity that can happen in clinical encounters that sometimes doctors have, which begin in and I'm sure in therapists too, but I'm just thinking of from the medical context, and how it sort of can blend in, but it requires a kind of professional conscience. And then just address the issue of and also time, and then sort of connect that with, Lucas's idea that this is the way we show love as professionals, is by giving our time, which is our most precious commodity. And so that was sort of my case or project.
Well, um,
Wow. Fascinating.
that's a fantastic
Yeah.
job, everybody. Give
Yes.
Jeffrey a big hand. I it reminds me of what Alexander Battiani did that time with, when he saw this person is not his patient, but I feel this calling. I just have to do something, something for him, and that's what you did, that it always comes from beyond us, and we know when there's something we are specifically capable of doing here that no one else can do. That's what you correctly assessed. No one else
Mhm.
could have done what you did. And it really takes me behind the scenes also to see. I mean, I kind of realized what happens with doctors and not being able to devote the time. That's actually what Nelson is writing his project about. So I think he would be very
Yeah.
happy to see what you wrote.
Yeah.
But but this is
I should add.
this also makes me think that when people have any kind of disability or injury or anything that gets them off kilter, so it's not just what actually happened to them, but their attitude towards what happened to them that really makes a difference. And now here, um, attributing the behavior to the concussion was not helpful, but in a way, it's not only that it was not helpful, but it allowed them to ignore the real the real meaning. It just completely allowed them to completely overlook that. So you might say, oh, if I can attribute it to the concussion, then I can have a reason for it, and I but didn't allow them to see what's, as you said, to see what's really happening. So
Right.
it's a fantastic example of how, you need to see what's really happening. You need to see what the real meaning is about. So
And that's an important point. And you'll see in the manuscript is in the name of expediency, a lot of times, we make things easier for each other, professionals do. And
right,
so like the psychiatry stepdaughter, she's making it easy. She's very expert. The wife was the psychotherapist, is, very
right,
expert. And so it sort of makes it easier to sort of put the package together. And you'll see in the
yes,
manuscript, if you end up for those that I debrief with the stepdaughter, because we interact a fair amount with other patients, just thinking about how wrong this could have gone and how good the outcome was, and sort of like how wrong it has gone without us knowing. And we think we did a good job. And that's true
yeah,
for all professionals. This sort of humbling idea that you have to sort of keep your eyes wide open all the time to be as effective as you can be.
yeah, and like it makes you realize how often it does go wrong, because
Yeah,
people are
scary,
not paying attention, and they're in the system that kind of locks
scary.
them into
It's,
that.
real life. But,
Yeah,
mhm.
wow. So
Yeah.
thank you for being so alert and for being, for really illustrating the particular context of being a provider and yet not being able to provide. It's like you said, you could, but it would take a lot of energy to do it. So that's where the conscience kicks in, and it says no, but it's my responsibility to put in that effort. So what does anybody else have to say?
Just to tie up to what you said in the end, that it might have gone for a long time. I think if it would have gone for a long time, and it probably would have, they might have hospitalized him.
Yeah.
That would have gone to the psychiatry department now, not to neurology, because they
Yeah.
would say something happened, the personality change, and it gets worse and worse and worse. So I find it really brilliant the way you just called yourself to responsibility, or you answered the call that was there, and it's really responsibility at its best. Really, it is so impressive, so touching, so it's incredible, really, because you just wanted the truth, and that's why you said to him, "It's just me and you. The doors are closed, and just be honest." And that touched him because
Yeah.
after all, he does want to feel better. And you were right. Their life was fucked. It's really terrible to live like that. And it wasn't like that before. Although the seeds of the problem were there before when he shut down, when he didn't say anything, but it wasn't that dynamics. So. And what I liked about this brilliant concept that you made up, paradoxical self-projection, and then you use the word caricature, and I just remembered that Franco, he used to draw caricatures all the time. That was part of his humor, and that was part of his special way of looking and seeing the essence of a person. And he caught the essence, and then he would draw it. You can see it in the book Recollections. There are some caricatures there of Freud and Adler and himself, etc. So, and also of Professor David Gutman, he did one like that. So I think it's a wonderful way to put stress down and to look from a detachment way of looking, and to have a better understanding of what's really happening, humor in general.
Yeah. Wow.
Thank
Okay.
you. That's very nice. Thank you so much.
You call it paradoxical self-projection? Is that what you called it?
Yeah,
You
just
could
made
say
I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, but it's a great
you could say
great addition.
reflection also. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.